And we're back, Stripe Show podcast on a Monday. I'm your host, Travis Fulton. Thank you for making us part of your day. Hope you had a great weekend as we look ahead, 4th of July week. I'll be taking a little time off this week and next. Got you covered, though. Got some podcasts scheduled, including today's podcast, which is going to be all about total driving. Felt appropriate as we get into the summer now, 4th of July, people playing golf across the country. You've got some reps in. You've established where your game is at this year, some good, some bad. You know, that never changes, right? I mean, there's always some good, there's always some bad in golf. Doesn't matter what your skill set is. Just ask Keegan Bradley, US Open, misses the cut, negative 4.2 strokes gain approach. I think he was negative 1 or 2 in strokes gain driving. Then he goes to the Travelers Championship 1 week later, positive 7.2 strokes gain approach, positive 7 putting, and he wins. It can flip just like that, even for the best players. So it's a difficult game, right? There's ups, there's downs. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. But if there's one thing for sure, I think in today's game, especially the professional game, we are in the distance era. There are more men and women bombing it out there at a tremendous length, plus 300 for so many guys now on the PGA Tour, the Korn Ferry Tour. I mean, length is something that is very much a part of our game. And as we start to look at how it applies to your game and what the driver means to you. I mean, let's face it. If we can drive the ball well, if we can get it out there in front of us, eliminate penalty shots, that's a huge bonus, right? I mean, there's nothing worse probably in golf going out there and hitting your driver poorly, just always being on the defense right out of the gate. It's like, man, if I could just get my driver in front of me, my irons are okay. You know, my short game's pretty good. I'm making some putts, whatever the case may be. But it's really hard to score if you're just spraying your driver everywhere. And so accuracy, we know, is still very much a part of this game, even though there can be from time to time some bomb and gouge right out there as we watch on TV. You might even see it at your own club. Some men and women that might get it out there a long ways, might not be particularly accurate, but the distance really kind of overwhelms the tee box that you're playing and the golf course that you're playing. So accuracy is still a part of this. We've got to keep it in front of us. I want to talk about some accuracy here today as it pertains to the driver, but also about distance. And for a lot of you listening today, what could I do to increase my distance? And when we talk about distance, well, we either got to increase club head speed or I should say, and or ball speed. We've got to get the ball speed up. That's the bottom line. Sometimes you can get the ball speed up just by hitting it more solid, right? The club head speed can maintain, but you can make an adjustment in your swing, hit it more solidly, smash factor more in your favor, and the ball speed picks up. Sometimes we have to increase club head speed, right? We've got to get the club head speed greater so the ball speed can be greater. So we'll talk about both of those things as well. Today's podcast all about total driving, as I call it. On my website, one of the top programs that I have and that people enjoy all over the world is Total Driving. You can go to travisfultongolf.com. You can click on training programs and you'll see Total Driving. It's a very inexpensive program that you can follow video by video by video. You do it in order. You know, one of the things when I built my website, I wanted to have programs that you could follow in order. Not everybody can come to the studio and work with me. And so I always like to give things context rather than just throwing something out there, try to give it context, maybe a curriculum per se to follow. And so they've been wildly successful. And I'm going to kind of follow that template and some of the key things that I think that are in Total Driving and the feedback that I've received from those that have done it that I think are very impactful, if you will, for most amateur players. So we got to start with the setup with the driver. And I'm going to bring in my buddy Sam Burns. You follow the Stripe Show podcast, you know I'm a big fan of Sammy Burns. Have been since he's come out on the PGA Tour. Has really has done a nice job, with his game. He works with a guy by the name of Brad Polin, and they've been together for a long time. And I want to talk about Sam's setup here for a second. Let's go ahead and play this through here. I'm trying to get it right at address. And for those that are watching, you can see Sam. And then for those that are listening, I'm going to articulate what we're looking at here. And when we look at Sam Burns, one of the things that you'll see with PGA Tour and all PGA Tour players, when they set up to the driver, of course, they'll get a big stance. They'll get the stance very wide. They'll get the ball position forward. I always kind of teach ball position more off the lead shoulder than I do the lead heel. The lowest point of the arc is going to be kind of the outside of the left shoulder if you're hitting it with a flat left wrist. And so the ball position should be somewhere in that left shoulder area. It's forward. Now, when you get the ball forward, there's a couple things you got to be careful with. One is you have to be careful that you don't turn and face the forward ball position. You want to be careful that your chest doesn't turn and face that forward ball position. And when you do that, your shoulders aim left. And more times than not, with the driver, we still see steepness and we see a path that wants to work to the left. So that's like the worst thing you can do is get your shoulders aiming too far to the left. More times than not, to feel square with the driver and that forward ball position, you have to feel a little closed, okay? And so your spine tilts back a little bit, tilts away from the target, your right shoulder lower than your left for a right-handed player, just like Sam here. And then for so many, you almost got to feel like you turn your chest to the right. If you look at Sam's head, it's kind of, now he's just barely moving into his backswing here. But he's kind of turned his chest a little to the right. He's not facing that forward ball position. Now, when you do that and you look out to the range or to the fairway, you may feel like you're a little closed for a right-handed player to the right. So a wedge, a 9, an 8, ball in the middle, it's a little easier to be square to that. It's right in the middle. But as you move it forward, generally speaking, most need to feel a little more closed with their shoulders in order to be square. Okay, now that's not everybody, but I would say in 23 years of teaching, it's most. Now, here is Joaquin Niemann for those watching. The second thing that I like when the ball position's forward is the hands are in line with the driver head. When we look at Niemann here, we can see the hands are in line with the driver head. I do not like leaning the shaft forward with the driver, okay? So, again, ball position forward up off that left shoulder. You can see there with Niemann, his feet are actually wider than his shoulders. Oftentimes with players, you'll see when you draw that line, that ball looks inside the left heel, right? It's like a little back of the left heel because their feet are so wide. Again, the true relationship's to the left shoulder. But you see he's tilted, spine tilted to the right shoulder's lower. You can see his head and his chest turned a little back to the right. You can see his hands are kind of in line with the driver head. This is a very clean setup. The other thing I think you can do is you can add a little weight to your right foot if you want. And that's the setup in where we want to be. All right. Now, once we set up, and I got to tell you, the setup helps so many players with the driver. I think the driver is one of the more difficult clubs to set up to. Where power and accuracy can come together, I do think is in the setup position, and I would set up very closely as I just described right there. Now, we're going to bring in one of the best drivers in the game, Scotty Scheffler. And one of the things that I like about Scotty is in the first move, he takes the club head and he keeps it a little bit out in front of him. And as we talk about now the swing, I want to get into some things that I think are important to hit the driver, some common issues that I see. All right. One of the most common issues that I see is in the very first move, the club head goes inside. I think one of the perceptions with the driver is that we want to take the driver head back low and in and around. Now, does the club head need to go around you? It does. We need to get it working around us. But for so many of you, the first move to the club head needs to be a little bit more out in front of you. okay, where the hands are what feel like maybe a little inside of the club head. Now, I've got Scotty stopped here where he's about halfway back, club shaft parallel to the ground. And the club shaft at this point, when it's parallel to the ground, is parallel to his toe line, which is square to his target line. Okay, so that's a pretty good checkpoint. I mean, if you can get your hands into your club head, that club shaft parallel to the target line, when the club shaft is parallel to the ground, then you're in a good spot. Now, I would see most club heads right there behind the hands, low and behind the hands, in. And if that club head goes in too much early, too low, too in, then it's going to restrict your turn. And you're promoting yourself to lift and then come back over the top. And so let's feel a little bit of width. Let's feel the club head a little bit more out in front of you. I think that's a very important piece to the puzzle. There we go. I stopped it even shorter that time. And you can see the club head clearly right there is a little out in front of him. So we have a little width, a little bit away from us, a little bit out in front of us. Now from there, we can turn. The club head's a little out. It's working up. Now we can turn and we can get the left arm working around us. Okay. So it feels a little out and then it feels a little around. And I think that's a sequence, frankly, that most that I see in the studio and I help them with their driver, that's the sequence that they need to feel, is a little more out or a little more out and up and then around the right hip. And that's when you want to get that right hip turning. And that's when you want to get the left shoulder coming across. And you can see with Scheffler, his left arm now, he's getting some depth. It's working around him. It's covering his right shoulder at the top of the swing. If we go back to face on and we look at a Joaquin Niemann, you're going to see that left shoulder is behind. Now that's a huge turn. We're not trying to turn like a very supple Joaquin Niemann as far as like how much he's turning. We're just using this as a visual to see that his left shoulder is incredibly behind the ball. Most of us aren't going to get there, but again, left shoulder behind, left knee even pointing behind. I like that. I think it's okay to release that left knee. I see so many restricting that left knee, keeping the left knee pointing too much out in front of the ball. Let that left knee come behind the ball. Let that right hip turn back. Let that right knee lose a little flexion. That'll get the left shoulder behind. And now when you can turn, now you can get the left arm moving around you. All right. So again, that sequence going back, out, around, kind of maximizing the turn, I think, is key. I really do. I think the backswing has value in all of this, all of golf, but I think the backswing and the driver has tremendous value. Because what you're looking at here is a nice turn. He's loading into the right side. There's a little bit of weight moving into the right side. His left arm is working around him. And so with this full turn, now he's got some depth that's working behind him. And now he's got some time to get the club to kind of pitch back behind him a little bit and then turn and hit it. I see, let me put it this way. I lengthen out more backswings than I shorten up over a period of time. There are people that have too long of a backswing, and sometimes you got to shorten them up. And usually when you do that, you got to kind of structure their arms and hands more. It's not that they're overturning, although sometimes it is, or they have a body fault per se. But oftentimes when you shorten them up, you're kind of structuring their arms and wrist angles better to give them some structure. And so when you look at it from a pivot standpoint and a body standpoint, usually I'm lengthening out that turn. I'm getting the right hip to turn a little bit more. I'm getting the left knee to release behind a little bit more. I'm getting the left shoulder to come back a little bit more. I'm getting the spine to extend. One of the things that I get feedback on, and when you do total driving, you will see a video where I talk about the lower body in the backswing, and then I talk about the upper body in the backswing. They're two separate videos. And the lower body, I think, helps a lot. But as that movement from the lower, it has a spiraling effect up to the upper body. And one of the things that I get a lot of feedback back on is the extension of the spine. Spine extension, if you stand straight up right now, if you're standing straight up as tall as you can, if you bow forward like we do at a dress, that's flexion. And then if you go the other way back, I'll do it with you. Extension. You feel that little dish in your back. So spine extension in the context of a turn feels like you're kind of spiraling up. Now, you still want to keep your head looking at the ball, but you feel like you're getting that full turn in the right hip, the full release of the left knee, left shoulder coming across, spine extending. You feel like there's a little more recruitment to be had there. And I like that. That really helps lengthen people out, load up into the right side. Now we have time to have our downswing. When you talk about when accuracy and power come together, I think what we just talked about there with the swing shape, the sequence of kind of the out and the up and then around with this turn, just as we described. I think so much of it right here, power and accuracy come together. Very, very important. Now, coming down. When we come down, I think, what's interesting is most everyone knows that there has to be weight shift, right? There has to be some assortment of weight shift. I've loaded in my right side. I've got a little flow going into my right side of the backswing. And now from there, I got to let that movement, I got to let that flow go back to the left side. I got to feel weight moving a bit lateral towards my left foot. And you can see with Burns here, he's moved his left knee back out over his left ankle. His left hip's moving out that way. So there's a little bit of a slide into the left foot, which then turns into rotation. So if I played this through, now we rotate. And I talk about this in the next videos of total driving, where we give the due diligence to the lower body with the weight shift to rotation, but again, managing the upper body in kind of its own separate capacity, because you can't just shift everything. You can't just laterally launch and lunge forward into your left foot. A lot of people do that. They launch off their trail foot and everything moves forward ahead of the ball. Now, you want to have weight shift, let it slide across the ground into your left foot, but as you turn it into rotation, you want your spine to return in that side bend to the right. You want to stay behind it. And so that side bend that we created at address feels very much the same at impact, if not a little bit more, because of that lower body shifting left. And that side bend to the right, as we continue through, kind of turns into extension. And this is kind of one of the interesting things I think about that is kind of another eye-opener for amateurs, is that not only do we have a little extension in the spine going back, but we have a little extension in the spine coming through. And so I shift and I turn, and as I'm turning through into post-impact, my spine again feels like it's extending back. I feel like I'm kind of elongating up as my left leg now is pushing up. And that's kind of how the downswing works. And I think really, in many ways, helps facilitate an attack angle that's more level and slightly on the more up. Now, I wanted to use this video, Neiman, because it's such a fun video to look at. I mean, if you ever get to watch a slow-mo of walking Neiman, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, look at that. I mean, you can just see the side bend, the extension in the spine. I mean, that is so much range of motion and suppleness. Now, I don't think, look, at some point, he's probably going to have some back issues. There's no question. We've seen it with Will Zalatoris, similar look. Sam Bennett has this look. That's a lot of side bend, and that's going to hurt the spine, you would think, at some point. But it does kind of help see what we're talking about here in some of these things. So the downswing, I think, really in many ways tends to get better as the backswing improves. I think the backswing has tremendous value. I know a lot of you listening, people that follow me on social media, they like to nudge me and say, Travis, the only thing that matters is impact. And my comeback to them is, do you think I've not thought about that? I understand that the only thing that matters is impact. I get that. But if you set up like a dog and you take it back like a dog, then your impact is probably going to be like a dog. And so what I try to do with the training program and what I try to do with my instruction is layer in things that people can do. And I think the more things that you can layer in ahead of time, the more the probability of your impact improves. And when I watch professional golfers set up, this is how I see them set up 90% of the time. Are there outliers? Of course there is. But I see the ball forward, off the left shoulder. I see spine tilt. I see the chest turned a little to the right. Nice wide stance, hands a little behind. I see a good sequence going back. I don't see a lot of tour players taking it way inside. Are there some? Yes, Matthew Fitzpatrick. There's always outliers. But if I taught you to take it back with the club head behind the hands early, I would not be sitting in this studio right now because I wouldn't be able to afford it. I would have went out of teaching 20 years ago. So keeping the club head a little more out in front of them, having a little width early, and then working it around like Scotty Scheffler, a little width out in front of him, and then around, maximizing that right hip, letting the left knee release, working it up from the ground, elongating with some extension around. Again, layers in a lot of good things. And because from here now you're going to want to shift your weight, right? You're going to want to shift your weight back to the left. And as we shift it back to the left, now the club shaft can pitch back behind us. And as the club shaft pitches back behind us, we can then turn and stay behind it. And you guys know, if you follow me, you know I love the club shaft pitching back behind and getting the club shaft in transition right there. Like Scotty, you can see that the club head is back behind the hands. Again, 90%, 95%, whatever. Tour players, they're shallowing that shaft out some. Are there exceptions to the rules like Ricky Fowler? Of course there is. There always is. The one thing you have to understand, if you're going to steepen the shaft in transition, then it's telling you and promoting you not to rotate. It's telling you and promoting you to stand up, early extend, get the higher handle. When you pitch the shaft back behind you, it's telling you to rotate. Now rotate and let the club turn the corner cleanly back around the other side. Here's another fun one to look at. Dustin Johnson. He can drive the ball pretty well. One thing I like about Dustin Johnson when I look at his swing is the first move is very much out in front of him. His hands actually go out too a little bit. This video's jumping around a little bit. His hands actually go out away from him as well. I don't necessarily like that. And so I'll show people Dustin Johnson and like, look at Dustin here. You can see, look at his hands right. You can see his first move, his hands kind of go out away. His left arm kind of comes off his body. But the club head to the hands is still, I think, good. There's kind of two relationships there. There's the club head to the hands, and then there's the hands to the body. And so keep your hands, in. Let your hands follow the turn. But try to keep the club head a little more, let's say, what feels like a little out in front of the hands. Again, that checkpoint parallel to the ground, parallel to the target line. If you get that, then again, as you turn, you maximize that right hip as DJ does. Look at that turn, that right hip turn back behind. You know that left knee, left shoulder is doing the right thing. And what I want to show you here with the turn with DJ is that space between the knees. Now, this camera angle is not ideal, but if there was a mirror that's down the target line where this camera is, and you as the player would look back to the mirror at the top of the swing, you would see some space between your knees. There's a little window opening up there. We call that a change of knee flex. And that change of knee flex really helps that turn in the hip, helps the spine elongate, extend, and helps you lengthen out the backswing and the turn to the top of the swing. I promise you guys, these are all things that I've been doing for years and years and years and help people. These are the goods. These are the things that have helped me build my business and what you look at right here in the Stripe Show podcast, the studio, et cetera, et cetera. And so Dustin's great with that. Now, does everybody have a change of knee flex? No, Keegan Bradley doesn't. He just won. There's always outliers, folks. Always outliers. DJ's always been a guy who pitches it back. Look at that club shaft right there. Great checkpoint coming down towards that delivery position. See that shaft right there laying down in the right form. If you can get the shaft to pitch back and lay down in the right form, you are moving in the right direction. And so much of that shaft pitch laying down is because of what you did going back. So the shaft lays down. Now it's telling his body to rotate. Not many rotate like DJ. I'm not telling you to open up as much as DJ. I'm just showing you as an example that you pitch it back and then you can rotate. Now, I want to talk about just a couple other little things. One of the things that's interesting between Scotty Scheffler and Dustin Johnson is Scheffler has the face open. When you look at the top, the toe is down. I am not, more times than not, I'm not a huge proponent of an open face going back. Now, if you're a highly skilled player, you've learned how to lean the shaft forward adequately at impact, then I think you can certainly play with a club face that is gently open. I promise you, with Scheffler, and talking with his coach Randy Smith a couple times, they try to keep that club face not as open. More times than not, when you look at drivers on the best drivers, here's DJ, he's on the other side. Look at the club face, it's looking up to the sky. That's a closed face. So in between there, club face at an angle 45, I think is a good place to be, or maybe slightly closed. Now, again, if someone comes in here and the face is slightly open, they're using the swing plane very well, they've got forward shaft lean, et cetera, I'm probably going to work around it. But more times than not, when I see a face that opens, I see compensation trying to close it. I see either you come over the top and or at the bottom, you throw it out in loose shaft lean. And this is a lesson that goes, deep into the iron game as well. And so I try to prepare that face in a way that's going to allow you to bring it back down a good plane angle and turn and hit it with adequate shaft lean. And so most players you see on tour is the face is probably pretty square to slightly close. Are there open face players? Of course there are. So there's always outliers, folks. But again, I'm just telling you things that have been successful and that I've seen time and time and time and time and time again in 23 years of teaching. So DJ has it shut. Tiger had it square. JT has it square. Victor Hovland has it a little shut. Morikawa square. Scheffler slightly open. Keegan Bradley slightly open. You just go down the list, and it's going to be predominantly square to slightly closed. So that's a little bit about face angle as well. Now, as you start to work on these things, whatever the changes might be, whether it's at address or it's in the backswing or it's in the downswing or it's to the finish. Because when we start talking about the finish, and I know a lot of you right now, hey, Travis, what about the finish? What's interesting about the finish is the finish starts to get better and better as things start to align before that. You can make the argument that the golf swing is very much action reaction. If you get the club face out of position going back and or coming down, like you're going to respond and react and compensate in a manner that's going to help you keep it in front of you. So what I always tell people is that my job, in particularly in the amateur game and when I'm issuing instruction, just like this podcast, is I'm trying to layer in things that's going to improve the probability of impact. If I can improve the probability of impact and I can do those things and layer those things before impact occurs, then those things will develop as you practice, as you play. Now, are there patterns that require higher maintenance, more hands, more timing? Of course there is. And so that's what I try to do at address, just like I talked about. I'm dealing you a better hand, 5 cards. If we're playing poker and we use that analogy, I'm trying to give you some face cards rather than 2, 4, 7 offsuit, which I tend to get always. So the setup, the backswing, as I talked about, then leads to a better downswing. If it doesn't, then we have to get in there and rewire it. And that's in total driving. We kind of keep it going. All right, your backswing's better. Now let's have a weight shift. Let's manage the spine. Let's make sure it's pitched back. And then from there, as we start to turn, now we're into impact. We're going to let it release back around the other side with some extension. And eventually that club kind of releases over the lead shoulder and your right foot's up onto the toe. And what's fascinating, and again, I can show you endless lessons in here and online lessons where all of that stuff just gets better and better and better and better as you layer in more face cards ahead of it. You can play poker longer if you're getting better hands. Can you bluff and make some things work from time to time? Of course you can. But golf is better if you get better cards, if you follow my drift. Your skill set's going to improve. And with driving, what I've shared with you today, I think you'll get more distance and more accuracy. I hope you enjoyed that. Total driving on a Monday, 4th of July week. Have a great holiday week, everybody. Thank you for being here, Stripe Show Podcast. Go check it out. Total Driving at TravisFultonGolf.com.